A billionaire's wife poured red wine on a black CEO's lap, in front of his entire board. She laughed. He didn't flinch. He just looked her in the eyes and said, "You just lost $1 billion." It was supposed to be a celebration. Crystal chandeliers, $800 bottles of Bordeaux, the skyline of Manhattan glittering in the background, the kind of night that makes you feel untouchable. Until the billionaire's wife reached for her glass and poured it onto his lap, not by accident, not even in a moment of clumsy laughter. No, this was slow, deliberate, smug. The red wine spread across his tailored charcoal suit like blood on snow. The room froze. She smiled. That smile didn't last long. Because the man she drenched, he didn't yell, he didn't even flinch. He calmly dabbed his lap with a napkin, looked her straight in the eyes and said, "You just lost $1 billion. Let's rewind." The setting, Le Ciel Privé, one of the most exclusive rooftop dining experiences in New York. You don't book a table here, you get summoned. That night, 3 couples were seated together, each worth more than the GDP of small countries. At the head, Charles Lexington III, oil magnate, legacy billionaire, and the type of man who signs checks bigger than hospital budgets. Beside him, Victoria Lexington, Ivy League polished, old money proud, and utterly unaware of what was coming. Across from them sat Marcus King, tall, reserved, mid-40s, Armani suit, impeccable posture, not a word wasted. You could mistake him for the bodyguard if you weren't paying attention. The truth? He was the most powerful man at the table, but Victoria didn't see it. She only saw skin, status, assumptions, and she couldn't help herself. At first, it was passive. She'd correct him on wines he didn't ask about, laugh loudly when he shared an insight about market trends. "Oh, that's adorable," she said at one point, after he offered a quiet but sharp opinion on global oil futures. Adorable Charles, sensing her tone, chuckled nervously. He knew who Marcus was. He just didn't know how much he was. The thing is, Marcus didn't need to prove anything. He wasn't there for validation. He was there for a final dinner to close a deal that would have merged Lexington Oil with one of the fastest-growing energy firms in the country, a firm that Marcus co-founded. But Victoria? She didn't like feeling unimportant, and Marcus's composure made her feel invisible. That's when she reached for the wine. A calculated humiliation, a subtle power play, meant to put him in his place. Instead, it revealed hers. When the liquid hit his lap, everyone went silent. Except her. She gave a mocking laugh, like it was all just cheeky fun. But Marcus's eyes never blinked. "You just lost $1 billion, he said softly. Victoria's smirk melted. Charles looked like he'd been shot. Because in that moment it clicked. The man his wife had just insulted wasn't just a partner in the deal. Marcus was the keystone, the one who had final signing authority, the man behind the curtain. And that curtain just dropped. But what Victoria didn't realize yet? The wine wasn't the mistake. The mistake was underestimating the wrong man and the cost. We haven't even gotten started. Before the wine, before the $1 billion loss, there was Victoria, born Victoria, Harrington. She was raised in a world where the air was different, softer, more forgiving, rarely told no. Summers in the Hamptons, winters in Gstaad, prep school by 9, debutante balls by 16. The kind of childhood where charm is inherited and arrogance is cultivated like fine wine. She didn't just marry into wealth, she was bred by it. To understand why she poured that wine, you need to understand how entitlement becomes invisible to the entitled. To Victoria, power was her native language. Everything she wanted, from art pieces to access, had always been handed to her with a smile and a silver tray. So when Marcus King sat at her table, quiet, unmoved, and unimpressed, it wasn't just confusing, it was insulting. She wasn't used to that kind of silence. At first, she tried to regain footing the only way she knew how. Condescension dressed as charm. complimenting his suit while subtly critiquing the cut, asking where he grew up, then repeating the name of his neighborhood with a puzzled tone, as if trying to locate it on a non-existent map of privilege. Oh, Queens? Was it? Yes, Queens, the borough that raised a future billionaire. Not that she cared to find out. And Marcus? He simply nodded. No correction, no defense, just quiet understanding. But silence to people like Victoria feels like challenge. She began to escalate, correcting him on wines, despite the fact that Marcus owned part of the vineyard, dismissing his economic insights, unaware he held 2 Ivy League degrees, one from Harvard Business School, laughing at his subtle jokes, not because they weren't funny, but because they came from someone she didn't think could be clever. She never once asked what he did, not once. Because in her eyes, if you didn't arrive in a certain package, the right skin, the right accent, the right legacy, then you couldn't possibly matter. Her husband Charles, on the other hand, knew exactly who Marcus was, but like many men in power, he believed the money would speak louder than his wife's behavior. He didn't want to correct her or risk derailing the deal by calling attention to her conduct. So he stayed silent too. That silence would cost him everything. Because Marcus was watching, not out of offense, but out of clarity, he'd seen it before. In boardrooms, investor summits, charity galas, the smile that masks supremacy, the questions that aren't really questions, the subtle weapons of class warfare, sharpened with generations of privilege. But this time, it wasn't just about him. It was about what that kind of attitude meant for a partnership. If they couldn't respect him at dinner, how would they treat his team, his employees, his vision? Respect isn't just polite, it's predictive. And Victoria was showing her true self, unfiltered, between each glass of wine and each manufactured smile. She saw Marcus not as a man, not even as a threat, but as a footnote in her evening plans. That was her real mistake, because while she was calculating status, Marcus was calculating risk. Every smirk, every backhanded compliment, every laugh that carried just a little too long. It all told him one thing. This wasn't someone he could trust, not with his time, not with his name, and definitely not with a billion-dollar merger. So by the time the wine hit his lap, the decision had already been made. The pour wasn't the cause, it was the final confirmation. But the man she looked down on was about to show her what real power looks like, and when he did, the world would be watching. Marcus King didn't look like the man who could tank a billion-dollar deal in one sentence, but that's exactly what made him so dangerous. He was quiet, not shy, not passive, just intentional. Every word he said had weight, every pause had purpose. He was the kind of man who could command a room by simply existing in it. No theatrics, no raised voice, just presence. Born in a single-bedroom apartment in Queens, raised by a mother who worked double shifts as a nurse and a father who never finished high school, Marcus wasn't supposed to be at that table. According to the system, he was supposed to stay in his place. He didn't. By 12, he was tutoring high schoolers in math. By 16, he'd built a stock portfolio larger than most of his teachers' retirement accounts. By 22, he had degrees from MIT and Wharton, both earned with full scholarships and zero connections. But paper wasn't enough. Marcus knew that to play in a game rigged against him, he had to own the board. So he built something, an energy tech company focused on renewable microgrid systems, efficient, scalable, and years ahead of its competitors. Investors laughed at first. Then the results spoke. His company went from garage project to IPO in 6 years, earning him billions in silent equity and a seat at nearly every boardroom that mattered. But Marcus preferred staying out of the spotlight. He let his CTO speak at conferences, let his CFO handle interviews. He stayed in the shadows, observing, analyzing, calculating. He didn't need to be seen, he needed to be respected, and he was, quietly, powerfully, relentlessly. Which brings us back to that dinner. The Lexington deal wasn't a typical merger. It was strategic. A chance for an old money oil empire to buy relevance in a world shifting toward clean energy. They needed him more than he needed them. Charles knew that, but Charles believed charm could close any deal, even if the room was burning. What Charles didn't understand is that Marcus wasn't looking for money. He had that. He was looking for partners who shared vision, not just valuation, and when he saw how Victoria treated people, how Charles tolerated it, he got his answer. People like Marcus know the value of optics. He understood what it meant, being the only black man at the table with the most power and the least visible influence. That's why he didn't react when insulted. His power wasn't in raising his voice, it was in withholding his signature. He wasn't loud, but his decisions echoed. That night, he wore a $12,000 suit and a $60 Casio watch, not because he couldn't afford better, but because it reminded him of who he was, where he started, what he fought through, and what he stood for. When Victoria laughed at him, she wasn't just mocking a man, she was mocking the struggle, the discipline, the quiet excellence it took to get to that chair. She mocked every invisible fight he won to sit in a room where people like her never expected him to be. And he smiled, because he already knew. In a few minutes, her entire life was about to change. And in just a few words, he would make the entire table realize who they were really dining with. The wine hit his lap like a gunshot in a library. Time slowed. Conversation froze mid-sentence. Forks hovered inches from mouths. A thick, stunned silence swept across the table like a wave crashing into a still lake. The crimson stain spread quickly, climbing across the fabric of Marcus's perfectly tailored trousers. Victoria let out a breathy, almost mocking laugh, the kind of laugh that tried to claim it was a joke before anyone could process it. But Marcus didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even glance down at the mess. He calmly picked up a napkin, dabbed his pants once, and looked her directly in the eye. Then he said it. "You just lost $1 billion. Victoria blinked. Charles turned pale. The others at the table, investors, board members, legal advisors, suddenly realized they were no longer at a dinner party. They were at ground zero. What followed wasn't shouting or a dramatic exit. It was something worse. Silence. Marcus stood, smoothed his jacket, placed the soiled napkin on his plate, and turned to Charles. No hard feelings, just clarity. And with that, he walked away. No one chased him. No one could. The weight of what had just happened was still sinking in. Charles tried to laugh it off, saying something about red wine and red tape, but it landed with a thud, because everyone at that table, every person in that room, knew what had just occurred. The deal was dead, not because of numbers, not because of negotiation, because of respect. Marcus was a man who valued data, logic, execution, but more than anything, he valued principle, and what just happened had violated every principle he built his empire on. Behind the scenes, the dominoes started falling instantly. His lawyers, already briefed, began pulling contracts. Scheduled signings were quietly canceled. Venture capital funds Marcus had influence over began issuing alerts. Subtle, quiet signals to exit anything with Lexington Oil on it, a whisper campaign, not vindictive but surgical, began to ripple through the financial sector. No press releases, no interviews, just movement. By the time dessert was served, 3 joint projects were on indefinite hold. By the next morning, Lexington Oil's stock price dipped 4%. Nothing catastrophic, yet. But in the world of billion-dollar deals, perception is currency, and Marcus had just rewritten the perception. The story was already taking on a life of its own. People started whispering about what really happened at Le Ciel Privé. A leaked image, blurry but clear enough, showed Marcus leaving with wine on his lap. The caption? "Guess who's not signing the deal?" The internet did the rest, Victoria, unaware that she had just triggered a financial landslide, complained to Charles about how sensitive that man was being. Charles didn't respond. He was on the phone with lawyers, frantically trying to figure out if anything could be salvaged. He knew the answer. He just didn't want to say it out loud. You see, Marcus's genius wasn't just in the companies he built. It was in the way he built them, around values, around culture, around partnerships rooted in mutual respect. He didn't need Lexington. They needed him, but they didn't know that until it was too late. One glass of wine, one moment of arrogance, and just like that, $1 billion dream slipped through their fingers like sand. But the fallout? That's where things really got interesting, because Marcus wasn't done, and the world was about to find out what happens when power walks away. The morning after the dinner, headlines hadn't hit yet, but the tremors were already rippling through the financial world. Lexington Oil's phone lines were buzzing. Not with congratulations, but with quiet panic. Investors wanted updates. Partner companies were reconsidering commitments. PR managers were already on high alert. Something had happened, and word was spreading fast. Marcus hadn't said a word to the press. He didn't need to. The power of silence is that it makes people fill in the blanks, and the blanks were damning. A grainy photo surfaced on Twitter. Marcus walking out of Le Ciel Privé, wine-soaked but composed. The caption was simple. When the CEO walks away mid-deal, you know something went down. Within hours, the photo had tens of thousands of shares. People were tagging business journalists, speculating in comment threads, trying to connect the dots. The speculation only made things worse. That's when Marcus's office released a single line to the press. We've decided not to move forward with the Lexington partnership. No explanation, no drama, just a clear surgical withdrawal. And that silence? It was deafening, because now the media was hungry. Business Insider ran a headline within minutes. $1 billion deal dead. Sources say CEO walked out mid-dinner. The New York Times hinted at unconfirmed reports of an incident at the negotiation dinner, and then came the social media avalanche. Reddit threads dissected every detail of the wine photo. LinkedIn lit up with cryptic posts from consultants and insiders. Respect matters more than capital. Watch who you disrespect at the table. Without naming names, the message was loud and clear. Victoria Lexington had become the villain in a viral case study, without even realizing it. She thought it would blow over, that Marcus, like everyone else, would eventually come back to the table. But Marcus didn't play that game. He had nothing to prove. His value wasn't just financial, it was cultural, strategic, and symbolic. And now that value had been redirected elsewhere. Behind the scenes, things got uglier. Board members began questioning Charles's leadership. How could you let something so petty ruin a multi-year negotiation? One email read, shareholders were furious. Stock continued to slip. Not because of numbers, but because of narrative. And in the market, narrative is everything. The fallout wasn't just emotional, it was operational. Other CEOs took note. Some privately reached out to Marcus, expressing support. One even posted publicly. We stand with leaders who value dignity over deals. It wasn't just business anymore, it was principle. And the business world was watching closely. Meanwhile, Marcus continued building. He shifted the deal to another partner, a younger, values-driven firm in the Midwest. Within weeks, they finalized a new agreement, and Marcus's energy company's valuation soared. The message was clear. You don't need to tolerate disrespect to succeed. You can choose dignity and still win. Charles tried to clean it up. He released a public statement filled with legalese and vague regrets. Victoria, under pressure, deleted her social media accounts. She was never named publicly, but insiders knew. And the silence around her name only amplified the whispers. She begged Charles to fix it, but some things money can't undo. Because what had been spilled on that white tablecloth wasn't just wine, it was reputation, power, future. And Marcus had walked away from it without flinching. He thought a public apology could fix it. But some things, once broken, can't be repaired. And Marcus? He was just getting started. It started with a press conference, stiff suits, prepared remarks, and a row of apologetic faces behind a polished podium. Charles Lexington stood front and center, flanked by corporate PR advisors and legal counsel. Cameras flashed, reporters waited, and then, in a dry, rehearsed tone, he began. "We regret any misunderstanding during our recent negotiations with Mr. King. Lexington Oil remains committed to inclusion, excellence, and integrity." It sounded like damage control, because it was what it didn't sound like: accountability. The apology never mentioned what happened, never acknowledged the dinner, the wine, or the disrespect. It simply tiptoed around the wreckage, hoping the world would forget what they never fully admitted. But the world didn't forget, because the internet had already chosen its narrative, and in this case, it was simple. Marcus King was the composed genius who walked away with grace. The Lexingtons, the embodiment of tone-deaf privilege, trying to PR spin their way out of disaster. Even the apology backfired. Journalists mocked its vagueness. Analysts called it strategically weak. One viral tweet summed it up perfectly: a masterclass in saying nothing while everything burns. And burn it did. Investors began withdrawing. Small at first, then in waves. Lexington Oil's stock dipped another 7%, bringing its total drop to nearly 15% in just over a week. Ratings agencies put the company under review. Banks began asking harder questions. Behind closed doors, it was chaos. Victoria had become a ghost in her own home. She rarely left the penthouse. Friends stopped inviting her to social events. Some stopped responding altogether, not because they judged her, but because they feared association. Charles was unraveling. His board wanted answers. His shareholders wanted heads to roll, and his leadership was officially under review. There were whispers of forcing him to step down, not immediately, but quietly, through a restructured transition plan. All because of one night, one glass, one moment. But Marcus hadn't said another word. He didn't post a victory tweet, didn't leak insider info, didn't issue a statement. His silence continued, calm, calculated, and crushing. Instead, he kept building. The new partnership he'd inked, already making waves. Energy media outlets praised the move. One op-ed called it the most principled pivot of the decade, and investors followed. His company's valuation rose 18% in a single week. He didn't just win, he elevated, and that contrast between Marcus's quiet rise and the Lexingtons' loud collapse became the story. Universities held panels dissecting the incident as a case study in ethical leadership. MBA students debated the long-term effects of ego in executive culture. Podcasts discussed how power has shifted from legacy wealth to earned integrity. And through it all, Marcus stayed quiet, because when the world tells your story for you, you don't need to narrate it. As for Charles and Victoria, they tried everything: private calls, back-channel apologies, anonymous donations to causes Marcus supported, but it was too late. The trust was broken. The optics were irreversible. Worse still, the collapse wasn't isolated. A tech company previously aligned with Lexington pulled out of a joint venture. A government contract was quietly reassigned to a competitor. The ripple effects spread beyond oil, into tech, infrastructure, and even philanthropy. Reputation isn't just image, it's leverage. And they had lost it, all because of arrogance mistaken for charm. And the worst part? Marcus never raised his voice, but when he moved, the whole industry listened. 6 months later, Le Ciel Privé was booked again. Same skyline, same crystal glassware, but this time there was no Marcus, no Charles, no billion-dollar deal on the table. Just whispers. Because the story had gone beyond finance, it had become folklore, a cautionary tale taught in MBA classrooms, dissected in leadership workshops, and whispered across every corner of corporate America. The lesson? Power isn't always loud, and dignity doesn't need an audience. Marcus King had become a symbol, not just of black excellence or strategic mastery, but of restraint, of what it looks like when a man who earned everything walks away from everything he didn't deserve. His company? Thriving? His values? Intact? His silence? Louder than ever, he never told his side of the story. Not on TV, not in interviews, not in best-selling memoirs. Because he didn't need the world to know the details, he just needed them to know the standard. And now, they did. As for the Lexingtons, the fallout didn't end with stock losses or boardroom blame. Charles eventually stepped down. Officially, it was retirement. Internally, it was forced. The brand he spent decades building now belonged to others. Its legacy was stained, not just by what happened, but by what was allowed to happen. Victoria disappeared from public life entirely. Her name was never mentioned again in investor meetings or media coverage. She became a ghost of a billion-dollar mistake, not just to others, but to herself. And no matter how much money they threw at the problem, they could never buy back what they lost that night: credibility. Because in business, as in life, respect isn't a favor, it's a currency, and once you're bankrupt, rebuilding takes more than press releases and charity galas. It takes truth, and the truth was this. They didn't lose the deal because of a glass of wine. They lost it because of a worldview, one that saw manners as optional and people as pieces on a board they believed they owned. But Marcus wasn't a piece. He was the board. He played the long game. He bet on character, and he won. Not with noise, not with revenge, but with presence, because some people think power is about making others feel small, but the ones who truly have it, they make you feel your own size without ever lifting their voice. Marcus reminded the world that there is strength in restraint, that the most powerful person in the room isn't the one talking the most. It's the one who knows when to stand up and walk away. That's the billion-dollar lesson. A deal may fall apart in seconds, but respect is built or lost over years. And in a single moment, one man reminded an entire industry, values don't just protect your reputation, they are your reputation. So the next time someone looks across the table and sees someone they think doesn't belong there, they might think twice. Because the quietest one at the table might be the one holding the pen. If you found this story powerful, hit the like button and subscribe. We tell true stories that reveal hidden power, painful lessons, and unforgettable turnarounds. And trust me, this was just one of many.